Everyone has a bright light inside of them that deserves to be seen by the world. That's why it's time to shine the light on the extraordinary who are accomplishing phenomenal things. This is the Shine Out Loud Show with Lillian Obogo.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever in the world you are, and welcome to another episode of the Shine Out Loud Show with me, Lillian Obogo. Now, folks, I am so honored to interview the woman I have today. First of all, our guest is coming to us all the way from China, so I have to give her my heartfelt thanks for being up at this hour. I have the incredible founder and CEO of Rare Birds. Her passion and her professional life has been dedicated to creating a foundation and platform of female owners and founders in helping them grow social enterprises that are sustainable and impactful. I am talking about the incredible Jo-Ann Alexandra. Jo-Ann, hi.
Hi, Lillian.
Hi, how are you? How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. Now, just to make sure, anybody, if you're just joining us, I have Jo-Ann Alexandra on the phone, the founder and CEO of Rare Birds, and she creates a platform that is a global platform that sits to provide a space for female founders of social enterprise to flourish and connect. Jo-Ann, what made you create what made you create Rare Birds?
Okay, firstly, thank you so much for having me, inviting me on your podcast. It's an honor to be here with you as well. That was quite a rich introduction. Very nice.
Oh, you're welcome.
Wow.
You're welcome.
You're too kind, but thank you so much. Okay, to answer your question, what made me start Rare Birds? Actually, what I started 4 years and about 8 months ago was something called Secret Birds. Mm-hmm. And Secret Birds was the first idea that eventually became Rare Birds. Mm-hmm. So this was back in 2014. I was living in the UK at the time, back in London. And it was probably around the summer, I think like the summer of 2014. And I had an idea to start a business. I knew that I wasn't going to stick around in the corporate world much longer. I knew that my time was coming to its end. And I knew I wanted to start a business. So I went, you live in London, so you know how it is in London. There are all these events. So I started going to all these events to kind of meet different people and gather ideas and so on and so forth. And I realized that there wasn't much going on. Mm-hmm. So that's when I said, okay, well, maybe I can start doing my own thing. So that was the first idea. So it all stemmed from there, and eventually it evolved into what it is now, which is a brand that celebrates and invests in early stage women social entrepreneurs who are based in developing economies and emerging markets. So that's how it started. Initially, it was about bringing people like myself, particularly women, together who just have ideas and want to start something. Because I felt like when I was looking at the time in London, everything was geared towards people who had established businesses, towards people who were doing it for a much longer time. Mm-hmm. And I just felt like there wasn't a lot of space for those who were just starting out, for those who needed information, for those who just wanted to learn things. And that's a key part of what Rare Birds is, because it really does celebrate and look to get investors interested in those women who are in the early stages of their enterprises. So the first 5 years. Then within time, I decided to make it very focused on social enterprises, because I believe that impact is huge, particularly in the developing world. Everything is about impact, because in the developing world and in emerging markets, businesses aren't they're more of a necessity and you're solving big problems, versus, say, in the Western world where entrepreneurship is more of a luxury and it's kind of, how do I say, branded in a completely different way. Yes. You know, to how it is in the developing world. When you meet someone in the developing world who's an entrepreneur, they're usually an entrepreneur out of necessity, and they're solving big problems because these are poor countries. So with time, the focus changed. Why developing countries? Because I'm from the Caribbean, so that's what I know, and I'm interested in Africa, Caribbean, Latin America. The less known, less richer parts of the world, because that's me. That's what I can relate to, and that's Rare Birds. So that's what it is now. Long story short.
I remember when it was Secret Birds, and I remember being interviewed by you way back when, and I remember that what you had in place with Secret Birds was really almost it. And to use the bird metaphor, it was a nesting ground to give women that strength in their their business ideas, their business knowledge, their self-confidence, to strengthen them up that they can fly on their own. Because it's quite easy to start a business. They say that women of color are starting businesses in droves, because in serious numbers globally, yet we know that it's not sustainable. So what you were doing when you started was creating this nesting incubator stage for a lot of women. So I think that there's a need to acknowledge that and acknowledge how far that you've come with Rare Birds.
Oh, well, yeah, thank you so much. I started this, like I said, the idea came to me in the summer, June, July of 2014, and I left my entire corporate career behind in December of 2014. So I started working on what was Secret Birds in January 2015, and in 2017 I launched my first website, and then last year in 2018 I rebranded it as Rare Birds, and I finally firmed up my business model, and the new website launched in August of this year. It took about a year for the entire rebranding process to occur, because the name had to change. There were, I had to register the business. There were legal aspects to it, as you know. And I had to just change the entire model, and I'm developing a brand. So it took a lot of work, but I've got a great team. So here we are now.
Okay.
Rare Birds.
And that's incredible. So one of the missions that you have for Rare Birds is to connect, collaborate, and grow female founders globally. Now, actually, you know what? I'm going to ask this question, but I'm going to actually pick on something that you said when you talked about entrepreneurship in developing countries being out of necessities. And I think there's something that even how we brand entrepreneurs is something that needs to change, because out of necessity, we need to remember that our great-grandmothers, our grandmothers were entrepreneurs. If we actually look at it, the women who sold in the markets, who went to farm, who bartered, who started small businesses in their kitchen, from their kitchen, there needs to be a rebrand to include that when we look at businesses in the developing economies. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think that where you and I come from, I mean, I know you're British, but you're Nigerian, and
Yes.
British Nigerian, so I know you can relate. I think where you and I come from, countries where you and I come from, where we were raised, brought up, what have you, women definitely, they're business people. I mean, but they're just not called that. They're entrepreneurs, but they're not called that. They don't, in the Western world, particularly in North America, in Western Europe, becoming an entrepreneur is a very glamorous title. It's something that is reserved for maybe certain people in the middle class or the elites. And, it's just very different. You have this idea, and it's like, startup culture, get your business funded, yada, yada, yada. It's very different. And when you leave that space and you go into Africa, into certain parts of Asia, Latin America, and Caribbean, everybody's hustling. Everybody's got a business. Everybody's an entrepreneur. Everybody's doing something. The difference is that it may be difficult to scale in the developing world versus in the Western world, where there's more infrastructure in place to scale, just because of the nature of it being the developing world. So that's one of the reasons why Rare Birds exists, because we all know funding is a problem, and more so for women and more so for people in countries in the developing world. But to answer your question, I agree. I think that in the developing world, women have always been leaders and women have always been entrepreneurs, because that's just That's just the way it is. What makes the developing world developed is the lack of infrastructure. It's the lack of institution. It's the lack of support. I think I read an article somewhere recently that said in Germany, it's like one in every, I think it's no less than 20%. I might be wrong, but less than 20% of the population becomes entrepreneurs because they don't have to. It's such a strong, developed country. They have big companies. People get jobs, and that's just what they're expected to do. Mm-hmm. That infrastructure isn't in place in other parts of the world. So it is definitely a necessity. And women do what they have to do.
Exactly. Yeah. So when we were looking at Rare Birds, and you are saying, yes, you have to have a sustainable business. It has to be a social enterprise. What makes a female founder the right fit to become a member of Rare Birds?
Well, the way Rare Birds is set up, it's not, there's different aspects to the platform. So going back to the two main focuses of the platform, which is celebrating and investing. So the celebration aspect is done through the podcast. It's through the magazine. It's through the e-commerce platform where we've got all the products that are related to our brand. You know, you want to live this lifestyle. And also I've got a club. It's a very small club, but the club is for a very small few select group of women that's only going to kick off every so often, maybe like once a year. The investment part is the next level of this platform, whereby I'm going to be integrating a crowdfunding element. So early stage women entrepreneurs can put their campaigns on the platform and get their campaigns funded through the crowd. Mm-hmm. So that's the next stage. That's the investment. So there isn't a membership per se. So anybody can get involved. As long as you are an early stage women social entrepreneur from a developing country solving a big problem. We've got some criteria on the website in terms of what kind of problems you're solving. There's like environment, there's science, there's art, what have you. But it's generally the kind of things that you would find in developing countries anyway. So if you're working on period poverty, if you're working in fintech, all of that stuff. I just feel like everybody in the developing world is essentially a social entrepreneur because you're providing needs, you know, not wants, not desires.
Okay. So you've just recently gone through this major rebrand. What will be the first thing that you would advise any woman in her business that wants to rebrand? What would you advise her to do?
Wow, that's such a good question. I think when you're rebranding your business, what matters most is knowing your story, knowing your voice, knowing your why, knowing why you're doing what you're doing. Right. I was always very clear about what this platform business, whatever was going, the purpose of it. I didn't always know how it would look, but I knew the purpose of it. And that's why I was able to stay focused. I knew it was for women. I knew it was about impact, but I wasn't quite sure what that would look like. So I stuck it through. And that story began with me, you know, the woman who had big ideas, the woman who wanted to do a little bit more, but it's like, okay, you've got this corporate job. How do you leave that? How do you move into a new direction? So the story began with me. So I think when you're branding your business, it has to begin with your story. That's the most powerful tool, is your story. And you have to know why you're doing what you're doing. And I think once you've got that, and then you can create a package, a brand around that, then that's success, really, in my view.
Okay. And that's the thing. And understanding the story and the journey, sometimes we get lost. We get lost because we're thinking, we're always kind of comparing ourselves to other people. We're looking at social media thinking, okay, we should have it all together. So when you think about this idea of success versus failure, the fact that we do not actually have honest conversations about where we slip up and fall as business owners, what would be your advice on women who are experiencing failures in their business, or actually thinking that, you know what, my business is not where I need to be, and having those conversations with themselves? What will be your advice to them on how to take themselves forward?
These are really good questions, Lillian. I wasn't ready for these questions. I'm just kidding. No, these are really good questions. I think, I always say I don't like to give advice because I feel like advice is always going to be from an individual's perspective, from my life experience. And everybody's got to make up their mind for themselves about what they want to do. But this is what I will say based on using myself as an example. I started this this idea came to me at the end of 2014, and this is now 2019. Okay, so it's been almost 5 years, and I'm still at it, and I'm still doing it. I think the reason why I'm still doing this is because I'm very clear. I'm very clear that I want to have impact. I'm very clear that I want to work with this particular group, and I'm very driven by something bigger than me. There's purpose, there's drive. And I think once you have that, you've solved 99.9% of your problems. Because if you're not working towards something bigger than yourself, you're always going to be looking at that other person. You're always going to be trying to figure out the next thing. But once you have a purpose and you know, okay, I'm getting up every day and I'm working at this, I don't know exactly where it's going to take me, which was my situation as well, but I know why I'm doing it, then all the other stuff falls aside. I think it's okay. You're supposed to fail. That's the way it works. And that's one of the reasons why Rare Birds is so important to me, because I believe that these stories are the untold stories. You know, we hear about women when they've been in business after 30 years, but by that point, they've done all the work. They're enjoying the success. What about those first 5 years or those first 10 years? That's when they're working really hard. That's when they're failing and they're doing all the iterations and so on and so forth. So I think that you're supposed to fail. That's a part of it. If you're not failing, then how are you learning? How are you growing? But I think what matters most is that you've just got to be focused on try to be clear on what you're doing and not get caught up in all the other stuff that's going around, because there's always going to be other people. I mean, but if you know why you're doing what you're doing, it's just easy to, I guess, kind of stay in your own lane, for lack of a better term. But I have to say, honestly, I've never had any issues with comparing myself to other people, because for me, it's always been, I know this is something I want to do. I think my greatest frustration came from, where is this going? Where is this going? Because it's like, when I started podcasting, I was just like, let me try a podcast. Like, everything was just, it was just all experimentation and trying different things. And I would get frustrated because it was just like, I know I'm close, but I'm not right there. So when I finally figured out my business model, I was like, yes. But even that is kind of like short-sighted as well, because your business should evolve. So even though I've got my model and everything, in 5 years, it might look different too, and that's okay. So I think it's a constant evolution. It's constantly trying to stay relevant. It's constantly trying to find ways to please your audience and making sure that you're serving your audience. Because I think when you make it about you, that's when you start comparing yourself to other people and worrying about failing and whatever. It's not about you. It's about the impact that you're trying to have.
Okay. I think that that point you made about we are supposed to fail, I think that needs to be taught in schools. We are supposed to fail. And from a perspective, because we go through life, especially for women, we take failure personally. So that is actually a very, very good point to make. Now, you were also, you've mentioned that you transitioned from your corporate career in 2014. You were in the property and construction industry, which is very, very male-dominated. First and foremost, what was it like to be a woman in that industry?
Let me see. When I started out, I was in the U.S., and then I was on the real estate side of things when I worked in the U.S., and then I came to the U.K., and I got more into like the construction, building, engineering side of things, and back into finance. Everything came full circle. When you say what was it like, you mean because it's male dominated, if I experienced discrimination or bias?
Well, from a bias point of view, sometimes it's not even a discrimination. Sometimes we know that we will enter environments where we are either the first and only, or the only woman in the room, the only woman of color in the room. And so I wanted to find out if you had any of those experiences where you found yourself alone in that environment.
Yeah, for sure. The thing is, right, yeah, like I'm coming from the Caribbean, right? I was born and raised in the Caribbean. I didn't leave the Caribbean until I was 18. So I grew up in an environment where everybody looked like me.
Right.
It was all like me. We had other people of color, black and brown people essentially. That's 99.9% of how I was raised. So predominantly white culture, white societies, that didn't come to me until I was an adult when I moved to North America and then to Western Europe. So I think that, yeah, of course I did experience that, but I always knew I wasn't going to be there long term. Like my plan was never to be there long term. And I think any woman of color who's living in a predominantly white environment in particularly in North America, in Western Europe, you will experience some kind of bias. I guess it's just how you choose to respond to it. And the property and construction industry is probably one of the most conservative industries as well. I mean, everybody knows it's like the slowest to change. I mean, in everything, not just with women and young people, but with everything, even with systems. It's just an old industry. It's a very old boys industry. It's a very old connected kind of network. So yeah, I mean, yeah, sometimes I was involved with women's organizations. That was helpful. That was fine. But I mean, I don't know. I think because I knew I wasn't going to be there for a long time, it was frustrating, but I was happy to move on with my life. And again, maybe because I came from a different kind of environment, maybe I wasn't too surprised at the fact that, okay, there was prejudice or there was sexism or there was racism. It's kind of the way it is, sadly. And not just for me, for a lot of women. It's the same for women who work in the city. It's the same. It's most industries in the corporate world are biased towards women and towards women of color or anybody that's not a white male, straight white male, heterosexual. That's just the way it is, sadly. So,
and that is sad, as you said, Sally, is the reality of the situation. But there is change, and there are constant people who are speaking up and owning and saying, we will continue to make changes in those spaces. Now, you've mentioned that you are currently out in China, and you are working for an academic institution. Now, as a Londoner, I'm going to have to ask you, what made you leave?
London, yeah. I think, first of all, it's very difficult to have a life and build a business in London, at least the kind of business that I'm trying to build. London is wildly expensive in a way that it's like, wow. It's, when you have a career and you're working, you see other professionals working, you realize, and in London, and you realize there are people making much more money than you and they can't even afford to buy a house. There are professionals in London with great high paying jobs and they're living in a house with 5 other people, or they're still living at home with their parents, or they've got to live in a somewhat of a dodgy neighborhood. It's very expensive as a professional, and it's even more expensive once you leave whatever your career is and you decide to build a business. So practically, it was just too expensive. It didn't make any sense. Then there was also the element of, okay, why am I still here? I'm not doing the corporate thing anymore. I mean, I'm trying to build a business for women who are like me. These women aren't necessarily in London. Then there was Brexit. So everything it was like the world was just saying leave. So I left, and I'm happy that I did. I mean, London's a great city, but I'm not sure that it's the place for me to be for the kind of business that I'm building, and also for the kind of lifestyle that I want to live. And now that I'm into teaching, I'm sadly to say, no disrespect to any teachers in the UK, but I would never be a teacher in the UK because you can't sustain yourself. You cannot live as a teacher in the UK. You don't get paid well. Everybody knows that. And it's not just the UK. The US is the same way. Very few countries pay teachers very well. China is one of those countries where you live very well as a teacher. But also, I knew that I wanted to be out of the Western world. If I'm building a business that's for a particular audience that's in the developing world, I needed to be in the developing world. And China, I mean, yes, China is people debate this, but China is still technically a developing country. It's just the most developed of the developing. And very soon it won't be developed. Very soon it won't be developing anymore. So being here the transformations that they've made in the past 40 years, this is an ideal place for me to be, or in Africa, or somewhere else in Asia. So to answer your question, London just wasn't feasible anymore. It wasn't feasible from a financial perspective. The Brexit situation didn't help. It just, I'm a foreigner, so everything was just going wrong. I think a lot of foreigners left London in 2016 with the whole Brexit debacle. I think a lot of people left.
You know what? I've promised myself I would not talk about Brexit on this show, but
yeah, for you guys in the UK, Brexit is a big topic. For me over here in China, nobody really cares, to be honest.
So yes, we will swiftly exit the Brexit conversation because
but I think life just happened and it just made more sense. So I left and I went back home for a while. I was in the Caribbean for like a year. And then I came to China. I mean, I wasn't planning to come to China. Again, life just happened. Doors open for you, and voila, here you are. But I really believe that where I am is where I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be here, and I love this country. I love being here, and I don't really have any strong desire to live in the Western world again. I feel like I've done that. I've done the US thing. I've done the UK thing. That's fine, but I don't want to live there for the rest of my life. It's not for me. So
no. There's been a lot of people who have started, especially us from the BME community, who are saying there has to be more to it than this. And so, yes, I definitely understand that drive to say what else is out there and actually look to explore that. And, looking at what you do, when I look at what you do, your professional background and experiences has spanned continents, countries. You've worked in so many different ways and industries. You work with emerging markets. Your core passion is sustainability. You've actually been out in South Asia doing lectures on agriculture and sustainability, which I'm thinking, how do we have that connection that you're doing that, guest lecturing on agricultural and sustainability? And then, but also you've worked with the UN providing mentorship programs. So how did you end up providing mentorship program to the United Nations Women Community Base, which was a program that they have in New York? How did that open up?
Well, I think, I'm going to say generally, once you decide that you're on a mission, all the doors start opening up, because everything just starts to fall into place, because you're like, okay, this is what I want to do. So you're going to start putting yourself in positions for those opportunities to come. And they do. And the UN thing, again, I didn't seek it out. It just kind of landed in my lap. I think it was like, let me see, it was actually right before I quit my job. So that happened in December, and I was just like, okay, I'm not going back. I'm done with this. And then like around the spring, I got an email saying, UN Women is looking for champions. Register your interest. And I just clicked on the link and I registered my interest. And then I got an email saying, okay, would you like to participate in this program? You need, this is the criteria. This is what we're looking for. This is what you have to do. And I did it, and I became one of the champions, and it was great. It was a great experience. It was nice to be amongst a cohort of women. It was something that the UN did for maybe 3-4 years, and then they stopped, but it was brilliant. It was fantastic. So that's how that happened. I mean, there's no grand story. It's just like coming to China. I put my CV on a website, and 2 days later I got a call from a principal of a school, and she was like, I'd love to have you come out here and work with us. So everything, it just happened really.
Okay. All right. I like there seems to be an air of serendipity, but there's also this whole, you're trusting in the actions, you're trusting in the fact that this is your mission, and you are actually just taking action after action. So, and I love the honesty about it. You're like, there was no grand scheme. It was, I just did this. No. This is what happened. This is the action. This is the result. And I think that we need more of those. Yes, not everything was big, grand, and glorious. I just took the action.
Yeah, and I mean, what I will say is that I was very clear that I was not going back to my corporate job. I was very clear that I was done. Like, I knew I'm not going to be in the corporate world for the rest of my life. I am not there's people who, I think I was watching a program once. I can't remember what it was. And this young woman, I think it was Grapevine. Grapevine is like this controversial show in the US that a lot of people don't like, but
Yes.
they're on YouTube. And there's this young woman on Grapevine, and she said it so eloquently. She's like, there's two sets of black. She was talking about black people in particular within the context of African Americans. Mm-hmm. And she was saying, and the girl is actually of Nigerian descent. And she was like, there's those people who they're going to play that, they're willing to play that game, and they're willing to go in there and do what they have to do and, play the game to get what they want. And then you're always going to have those people who are not interested in games. They're very clear. They know what they want to do, and they don't care how hard they have to struggle or what they have to do, but they're just not interested in games. I'm the latter. Like, I think I'm just not meant for the corporate world. I think certain people are wired for that. They're good at that. They're very successful in that world, and kudos to them, but that's not me. I am too much of my own person. I am too much of you tell me something, you tell me something to do and I don't like it, I'm going to challenge you. My personality is not suited for the corporate world. A big part of getting on, no, it's true. A big part, and it's important to know these things, Like, yes. I always tell my students, you gotta know who you are, know what you like, and know what you want. Because if you know that you're not someone that likes taking orders, or you like to challenge, you're probably not going to do well in those corporate spaces. Especially if you're working in a very old-fashioned industry like the property and construction industry, with a lot of men who can, very patriarchal, very sexist. And generally, that's just not me. I've got my own ideas. I know I like doing things my way. I like to take risks. Like, I don't fit that. And I don't like playing games. Like, that's just not me. So I knew I wasn't gonna stay there for a long time. So I was very clear that I'm moving on. What I didn't know was how I was going to move on, how I was going to make money, what I was going to do. But I just decided that whatever I have to do, I'm going to do it. And I did. And I think for everybody that I've met that's been in that situation, whether they've quit, they've been fired or anything, once they knew in their heads this is something that they wanted to do, they found a way to make it work, because you have no other option. You've got bills to pay. You've got a life to live. You've got things to do. So for me, and I'm never going to go back to that space. That's not my thing. That's not who I am.
Okay. So Jo-Ann, you talk a lot about the empowered woman. What does women's empowerment mean to you personally?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I don't talk about it anymore, because I think my platform is just embodies the spirit of what it means to be empowered. But what does it mean to me? I think every woman's got to define empowerment in her own way. I mean, I'm focused on economics. Right. I mean, people are focused on different things. For me, it's about economics. And I believe, again, like what I was saying before, knowing who you are, knowing what you want, and knowing what role you're going to play in the world. For people who come from poor countries, we don't need to go far for inspiration. Like, we look around us and we see the problems every day. Sometimes we are a part of the problem, So I think that knowing that you are in a position where you can affect change, and how you're going to do that is a big part of being empowered. Knowing your position, knowing what you can do. If you're someone that's elite and you're really privileged, it's understanding the role that you can play in solving problems. If you're someone that's at the bottom, it's understanding, having a unique and special understanding of how people are affected by problems, because the masses in the world are poor, and how you can work to change that, because you've got that special lens. So I think everybody's got a role to play, but you have to first recognize what role you want to play. And I think somehow you have to have a consciousness. There has to be an awakening somewhere, because you can be someone that's just living on autopilot. And I mean, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think when you see something, or you go through some changes, or you're conscious of the world around you and you want to have some impact, then that's a part of being empowered. Whether you're male, female, non-binary, whatever, it's just about having a deeper understanding of the fact that you can leave the world a little bit better than how you arrived in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's a very good stance to take. And you mentioned that your podcast that you started very early on with Secret Birds, and now moving forward, your next podcast project that's coming will be focused mainly on the Africa China in terms of entrepreneurship, leadership, and lifestyle. In your view, what connects Africa and China in terms of creating sustainable businesses for women?
Right. Okay. First, I want to say that the podcast is broad. It's going to feature a lot of different things because I'm doing it in a series, and one of those featured series is the Africa-China relationship.
Okay.
Mainly because I'm obviously I have a strong interest in Africa and I live in China, and because there is a strong relationship between Africa and China. I think most people know of the relationship from a government level, from a political level, but there's also a lot of people-to-people exchange happening between Africa, China, a lot of entrepreneurial and student exchanges. And in terms of, I think your question was, how is that important in terms of building women businesses? Well, it's so nuanced because there's so many African women, particularly young women and students here in China who are building businesses. So many. I mean, I'm going to be interviewing some of them on the podcast.
Right.
And there's so much entrepreneurial activity happening here in China. I mean, China makes it so easy to start a business. Chinese people themselves are very entrepreneurial. And there's just so much activity happening on the ground between young people and entrepreneurs between Africa and China. And it's an exciting time, you know. China once was, just like many countries in Africa, 40 years ago, very poor, in a completely different situation to where it is now. And 40 years on, it's the world's second largest economy. So I don't like to get into the conversation of China, Africa should be like China, because that's not what it is for me. But I think developing countries can learn a lot from China in terms of what to do and what not to do. And, you know, no other country in modern history has done what China has done, gotten themselves out of poverty in 40 years to where they are now. And I think next year the goal of the president is to just completely eradicate, like, you know, abject poverty. So I think there is a lot to learn, and there's a lot of growth happening between both countries. So it's an exciting time to see the exchanges. You know, there are a lot of Chinese people going and investing in startups in Africa. There's startup incubators here in China dedicated just to investing in African business or investing in Belt and Road Initiative businesses. So there's a lot happening, and I want to share those stories because those stories are important. And there are a lot of people who are already involved in this that have been doing this. Like, you've got people like there's Hannah Ryder, who's actually a British Kenyan, and she's the founder of a company here in China called Development Reimagined, and she does a lot of work with Africa, China, and she's involved with entrepreneurs. She brought entrepreneurs over, so if folks are interested, they can check her out on her website. There's a China Africa podcast that is hosted every week by Eric Oleander and Kobus, I forgot his surname, based in South Africa. So there's a lot of people already doing stuff around Africa, China, highlighting entrepreneur relationships. A lot of other people who I can mention who are interested in women's businesses here between Africa and China. So I'm just sort of adding to what's already happening. And it's exciting because it's a new relationship. The Africa-China relationship, it's different to, say, the Africa-European relationship or the Africa-US relationship. Yeah. You know?
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's really important. And so I think the fact that there is a lot of growth, and a lot of us who were out on this side of the world didn't know this was already this was happening. So
yeah,
when women like myself who are on this side of the globe who are thinking, how can I start building what we now term international tables, to start building global businesses, what should be the first step?
Oh, wow. I think it's about collaboration and partnering, to be honest, because I remember when I was in London and I first started, I was very focused on London. But then London is a transient city, and it's a global capital of the world because people from every nationality is represented in London. Mm-hmm. So you'd meet, someone from Chile, you can interview on your magazine or on your podcast, but then she would put you in contact with people back home in her country. So that's one way to start. The beauty of being in London is that there's a lot of cultural capital. Every nationality is in that tiny little city. So you can maximize on that and you can tap into those resources. Secondly, personally, I was moving around a lot. So when I was in the Caribbean, I had those connections in the Caribbean. I had connections back in the US, connections eventually, like I do work in India. I do a lot of things in different parts of the world. So I've been able to develop a lot of relationships. But for me, it's always been collaboration. I mean, my platform wouldn't be where it is now without working with other people. I'm not that entrepreneur that likes working by myself. I believe that, especially when you're in early stages, the best way to move forward is through collaboration. Like, I partner with people. I always say to people, I'd love to work with you. I'd love to support your platform. My first question is always, how can I support you? How can I help you? Because I just think that that's how everybody succeeds, by helping and supporting each other. So I think if you want to be global, you've got to number one, you've got to build relationships. You've got to start where you are and look into how, especially if you're in London, look into how you can build relationships with people there who can then help you to build relationships internationally. You've got to join international networks so you can meet different people in other parts of the world. And you've got to start collaborating with people in other parts of the world and asking people how you can help them and how you can support them. People love when you say, I'd love to support you. How can I help you? And they'll in turn do that for you. So I think that's the best way to start, at least initially. And then from there, you build yourself up. And before you know it, you've got a whole network of people you can tap into all over the world.
Okay. Thank you for that piece of advice. And I think that, that there's very solid action points that we can take away from that. Now, Jo-Ann, we have come to that point in the show where we do our So Loud moment of the week. This is where you get to give a virtual celebration to a person, a thing, or someone that you think, oh my God, what they've just done or what they're doing is absolutely amazing. So, who is going to be your So Loud person of the week?
Oh my gosh, I guess it'd have to be my friend in Kenya. Her name is Evelyn. Evelyn's business has been just kicking on. I mean, she's already successful as it is, but she's becoming more of a recognizable face in her industry. She's being invited into very sort of how do I explain it? Into circles that are usually not open to women like herself. She's been working really hard and she's starting to reap the rewards of her hard work. And I think she definitely deserves a shout out. And her name is Evelyn and she's based in Nairobi. And what she does is she runs a business called Eve Minette. And she essentially helps educate children on cybersecurity, children and parents. So she's passionate about ensuring that from a cybersecurity perspective, just ensuring that all of your home and workspaces are protected. But also she works specifically with kids. So educating children and inspiring children on how they can engage in a digital world. And I think her work is so important. So shout out to Evelyn.
Okay, so let's give Evelyn a huge round of applause.
Yeah, Evelyn.
Jo-Ann, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. I will love to get you back on for us to talk about some other things, to talk about more about what Redbirds is doing, and actually with all the development that's going on with how you are, progressing with a new brand. So I will definitely love to get you back on the show.
Yeah, and you need to come to China because I love China. I might never leave. No, I'm kidding. I'll eventually move back to Caribbean, but no, I love China. I love being here. I love living here. So I encourage your listeners to visit Asia, to visit other parts of the world, to come to China. Forget what you heard. One of the biggest misconceptions about China is, there's so many of them, it comes from media. Yes. And, all of us who come from countries that are not in the mainstream, we are very much aware of how the media tends to showcase and highlight different countries. The best way to learn about a country is to visit it. Countries and people are countries are complex, so the only way to learn is to visit. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised if you visit the Middle Kingdom, China. It's a great place.
Well, China has been on my bucket list for the longest, and definitely is a place I want to go
Yeah.
for a myriad of reasons. One, because the history and the architecture and everything, and just exploring that. But there's so much more
And the
to explore.
culture.
Exactly. If you go back
Yeah.
into the culture, there's a rich heritage in that from the Ming Dynasty and onwards. And just actually learning about it from within. But I think for me, there's a lot because when you think about China, you're like, oh, as a woman of color, how am I going to be
Mm.
received? So, in fact, that actually brings a question with your move to China. How did you find a supportive network of women of color when you arrived?
I think it's important to, and I understand this because if you were born and raised in a Western country, particularly in countries that are known for being institutionally racist, the US, the UK has their problems. Sometimes it's easy to have that baggage to carry that weight with you or
Mm-hmm.
wherever you go. And I get that because that's your experience and that's what you know. But I always encourage people to leave your baggage at home, to be frank. Don't come with the idea that, oh, I'm a woman of color, so I'm going to be treated a certain way, or because you're in a completely different region, a completely different continent, and wherever you go, your experiences are going to be different. But if you have the mindset that maybe you might be treated differently because of your color, you may be missing out and you might sort of jade any opportunities to connect deeper with people. So my experiences in China have not been as a woman of color, but as a foreigner. In China, you're either Chinese or you're foreign. That's the way it
Right.
is. Okay. And I think my experiences have been really good. Now, that could be because of confluence of factors. It could be because I work at a really good international school and I work with a really good team of people. It could be because I have a good principal. It could be because of where I live. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it could be so many different things. But my Chinese colleagues are amazing. I work in a Taiwanese school. Like any other school, we get our problems, but it's amazing. I have great colleagues. I love Shanghai. My experiences with the Chinese have been absolutely fantastic. Some of the kindest, warmest, friendliest people I've ever met in my life. I
Mm-hmm.
definitely experienced curiosity, especially in certain parts of the country where people are not accustomed to seeing people like me. But it's never aggressive. It's never in a way that makes me feel threatened. It's just curiosity. But then again, I'm in Shanghai. I'm like right on the edge of Shanghai. When I go into Shanghai, it's like being in London or New York. So I think my experiences here have been great. I haven't experienced anything that makes me feel like, oh, as a woman of color or whatever, that I'm different. I think you're a foreigner. And that's how it is in most of East Asia, Japan, Korea. You're a foreigner first, and then all the other stuff after. Yeah, and it also, depending on what kind of passport you carry, like, for example, I've met a lot of African Americans who've come to certain parts of Asia and they're like, oh, I'm just American. Because it's true. There's a point where when you leave your country, depending on what passport you carry, you're an American. You're an American versus, say, a Nigerian who's going to
Mm-hmm.
be a Nigerian. And an African American is going to have more privilege than a Nigerian. Because at the end of the day, you're no longer black, you're American. You know what I
Yes.
mean? So when you leave, I think it's important that's why, again, it's so important to travel. You have to understand context and what happens in the Western world doesn't happen here. And it has to be, you have to come in with an open mind and realize that the context is very different. Now, I know there are some people who would say, they've experienced issues here as a black person. I can't speak for their experiences, but
Of
that's not
course.
my narrative.
So,
That's not my narrative.
but for me, it's not even just the narrative of whether you experience negativity as a woman of color, but the things that we take that are important to us for women of color, our skincare, our hair care, having that
Yeah.
network of women that we can connect with, that look like us, that our understand us almost intrinsically. How did you find that connection? How do you even take care, your hair care in China? So those are the kind of questions that I'm actually quite
Yeah.
fascinated about.
Well, in China, I mean, my hair is natural and I do my own hair. Like my hair routine is very simple. I don't do wigs and weaves and the very high maintenance stuff. But when I do need to clip my ends, Or if I do want to say, like, I feel like one time I wanted to color my hair, I have my stylist. She's from Dominican Republic and she's in Shanghai. I mean, everybody's in Shanghai, so it's not hard to meet somebody to do your hair. Like, everybody's in Shanghai, whether it's African people, African American people. I mean, I've got a Dominican doing my hair that I go to in Shanghai. So it's not hard. And I mean, when you talk about South China, when you go down to Guangdong province, I mean, African women dominate the hair industry in that part of China. I don't think you will have a hard time finding someone to do your hair in China, especially if you're in one of the first tier cities, Shanghai, Beijing, etc. Because like black people, own things here, or they trade. Like, there's a woman online that I buy all my products from. Like, they're people, like, you can get everything. Everything is in China. Like, everything. China has everything. You just have to find the person, the contact. Like, there's like 20 people I have in my WeChat who I can buy hair products from if I want to. I mean, like, it's very easy. It's not hard. If you're in Japan, it might be a little bit different. If you're in Korea, it might be a little bit different, but not in China. Okay. And even in Japan and Korea, they have their small networks over there too. But no, you're not going to have any issues unless you're way out, say, in the western part of the country. That's a little bit more remote. But once you're in a big city or the central part or near the coast, you're fine, because there are a lot of foreigners here, and everybody's got their suppliers and everybody's got their people they can recommend to you. So you won't have any problems. And Shanghai is very Western. It's very Western. You can find all sorts of people here who can do your hair and who can give you skincare. We've got Taobao, which is like the Asia. The one thing I can compare Taobao to is like Amazon. Everything is on Taobao. You can buy everything on Taobao. Wow. Every product. Okay. So yeah.
So I've actually had a quick education on China, and being a woman coming in as a woman of color, that I don't need to worry. I can find everything. You're making me want to push China higher up on my travel list. So who knows? I might be in China I think early 2020.
But I think, if your audience is curious in knowing what it's like here, the only way to find out is to come. But also there's all these YouTubers now and influencers now that are, that travel all around the world, and they document their lives on YouTube or Instagram. You can follow them and, they talk about their experiences. I mean, there's also, I know there's like a Jamaican guy, I think he's based in Japan, and he does a show called Black in Asia or something like that, where he interviews different types of black people in Asia. There's Jessica Umbongo, Ugandan American, who's the first black woman to travel to all 195 countries. I mean, their travel now is like the norm for a lot of people. And you've got a lot of black influencers, like African American, Afro, Latino, every kind of black, who are traveling the world and documenting what they're doing. So it's not hard. It's not like it's in our parents' generation where only certain people travel. Like, it's not hard. You can and it's cheap. If London to Shanghai, get your ticket. LHR, London Heathrow to Shanghai, Pudong, PVG, and just come. That's the only way you're going to know what it's like. And you won't be surprised. Like, you're going to see a lot of black people everywhere, all over the place. And you're just going to be like, oh, okay. You're not going to feel out of place. You'll be fine.
Okay. All right. So you've heard it, folks. Let's put China on the list. Let's take a look. Let's go and see what other women and men of color are doing in terms of businesses. Let's start building that global table so that we are networking not just within London, not just within the UK or Western Europe. We are actually building global tables for us to rise up and step into our full leadership. Jo-Ann, once again,
there's a lot. I wanted to say very quickly, there are a lot of black people building businesses in China, like a lot of internationals, period, but a lot of black people. And I think that your audience might be surprised to know many of these businesses are hugely successful. And China is an amazing country to build a business, because the Chinese are very entrepreneurial and very hardworking, and they do business very well. So it's a great country to build a business. It's a great country to live and work in from an entrepreneurial perspective as well. So yeah, definitely check it out. Put it on your bucket list.
All right, will do. So Jo-Ann, once again, thank you so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be a guest on your show, and thank you again. And I wish you all the success. And I hope your audience enjoyed the conversation as well.
Thank you so much. So, folks, you know what to do. If you've enjoyed the show, you know where to find us on social media. If you want to reach out to Jo-Ann and find out more about what she does, her link is on her page on our webpage, which is shineoutloudshow.tv, and you know where to find it. You drop us a message on social media and reach out to Jo-Ann and find out what it means to be a rare bird building a sustainable business. So once again, folks, it's a wrap.
You've been listening to the Shine Out Loud Show. If you want to connect with us or let us know what you thought of today's show, be sure to follow us on Twitter at Shine Out Show.